Today's topic, women's resilience, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the COVID-19 recovery, is such an important topic to discuss from a public-private perspective every day, not just on International Women's Day. And so we're really pleased to be working with our patron member, Unhcr, in today's discussion. Our moderator, Concordia Leadership Council member and President Emeritus of Miami-Dade College, Dr. Eduardo Padrón, will introduce the topic in full, but I'd like to make a warm welcome on behalf of Concordia to our panelists. We have Kelly Clements, Deputy Commissioner to the Unhcr. Really, this is a welcome back to the Concordia stage, and I encourage everyone to check out past events where she's shown such immense thought leadership, to include the 2020 World Refugee, excuse me, I'm just on this much coffee today, which is not enough, apologies. So she spoke at the 2020 World Refugee Day programming, and this is available on our events page. Ms. Clements has a distinguished career shaping and improving refugee policy at the national and global level, previously working as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration for the U.S. Department of State. We have Maya Ghazal, Unhcr Goodwill Ambassador. Congratulations on this new title, an amazing achievement. Maya is a Syrian refugee. She's been involved with Unhcr since 2017, is the recipient of the Princess Diana Legacy Award, and has an important TEDx talk on why to invest in refugees. I encourage people to check it out. We have Tara Nathan, Executive Vice President of Public-Private Partnerships at MasterCard, a truly appropriate title for today's conversation. The humanitarian and development team that she leads, among other MasterCard efforts, seeks to create an ecosystem that streamlines access to education, health, commerce, and other vital services, thereby advancing commercially sustainable social impact, really truly thinking about that wraparound ecosystem that's essential. And we have Vaishali Misra. She's the business leader for the Ikea Social Entrepreneurship Initiative at Ikea, and works diligently to create to integrate social entrepreneurs and businesses into Ikea's immense value chain, with implications not just for the business owners themselves, but the communities that they're representing. So a truly, again, ecosystem builder. I'm thrilled to have her here. So again, a special thanks to Unhcr for partnering with us on today's conversation. With that, I will go on mute, stop my video, and turn everything into the capable hands of Dr. Padrón. Thanks all.
Thank you. And once again, I'm Eduardo Padrón, and I will have the privilege of moderating this very special program today. This program is bringing together people from all corners of the world. The panelists, as well as the audience, are in remote areas. And I think it's appropriate to say good morning, good afternoon, and even good evening for some of you. First, I really would like to express deep appreciation both to Concordia and to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees for sponsoring and organizing this program on the occasion of the 44th International Women's Day. I think it's something that you will enjoy, and I again privileged to be here with you today, especially as a former refugee. I'm a refugee to the United States, and so I'm very proud to be part of this today. The purpose of the session will be to celebrate women's resilience, entrepreneurship, and innovation as key enablers for the post-COVID recovery. We will especially highlight the role of women and contributions, especially refugee women. And we have a panel with some outstanding ladies, outstanding leaders who will, I'm sure, bring a lot of attention to some of the issues that I know the audience cares about. And before I get to the questions, I'd like to remind you that if you have questions you want to ask of any of the panelists or to the group, you should use the chat function and begin to send your questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So I'm going to start with you, Kelly. And I really would like to hear from your perspective, what has been the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the world's most vulnerable women and girls, and in particularly on refugee women and girls. And also, what are some of the challenges in addressing those issues?
Thank you so much, Dr. Padrón, and a big thanks to Concordia for hosting this today, this day after International Women's Day. And I'm really delighted to be with you, Dr. Padrón, and Vaishali, and our newest Goodwill ambassador, Maya, and my old friend, Tara. So you're right, dynamic women, and we're really looking forward to spending the next hour with you. Right now we're seeing historically unprecedented levels of forced displacement. The number of refugees and internally displaced, people that are forced to pick up everything and move from their homes, are at very high levels, over 80 million people in the world today. And we expect that when we again come out with new trends later this year, the number will be substantially higher given what has happened in 2020. And indeed, the pandemic really has made the situation of refugees and internally displaced persons, particularly for women and girls, amongst the pandemic, really quite profound in terms of the impact. What has happened is that the pandemic has become really a risk multiplier in terms of particularly the more vulnerable women and girls amongst those that are fleeing from their homes because of war, conflict, persecution, and the like. There are about 5 global challenges that we're looking at now with regard to the pandemic. First, we see that refugee women tend to be among the most exposed to the pandemic. Now, why, you might ask, is that the case? Well, the largest proportion of frontline health workers, including in those refugee communities, displaced communities, are women. According to WHO and UN Women, about 70% are female. So of course they are the first line responders, community health workers and the like, so at risk. Refugee women tend to be the caregivers, of course, for the sick as well as the elderly. The second issue is that the pandemic, like across the globe, and the economic impact has really wiped out the savings that refugee families have had and some of the earnings possible. Refugees tend to depend, and refugee women in particular, heavily on the informal sector for economic opportunity and ways to be able to support their families. What we have seen alarmingly is an increase in coping mechanisms in order to find the resources to be able to support families. We see increased incidents of women selling their bodies for sex to be able to make ends meet, and an increase in gender-based violence. Really, what we've seen too is that refugees often fall outside of the government social safety nets. So again, putting them at particular risk. The third global challenge has really been the increase, and we see this across the globe, but again, particularly for refugee women, increased tensions at home, and the potential for gender-based violence is substantially higher. Yesterday, we did put out a report on protection risks, and we found that the incidence of gender-based violence has increased in 27 countries around the globe. We've also seen that the teams have been reporting that in 89% of our operations, there is an increased risk at the severe or extreme level in country context in terms of refugee women and girls being at risk of gender-based violence. This is particularly acute in places like Colombia, where we see the incidence of GBV actually increasing 40% in the last year. And UNFPA, of course, has done some important work to note that every 3 months of a lockdown, we have 15 million more refugee women and girls, or women and girls generally, who are exposed to gender-based violence. So it's a huge concern for us. The fourth element is, of course, that families are just struggling to keep afloat, to be able to feed their families and to be able to have a roof over their head and to continue to survive, quite literally. This becomes particularly acute when you look at, for example, the impact of education, and particularly education on secondary girls. There is some work that we've done with the Malala Fund, where 50% of those refugee girls in secondary school who are out of school currently may never go back. And we want try to reverse that trend. And I know you're going to hear more from Maya about her own experience in that regard. And the fifth is just the ability to be able to continue to deliver aid in the context of a pandemic. It becomes very, very difficult. 85% of the people that we're serving are in lower or middle income countries. This means it is sometimes difficult, or there aren't the kind of health facilities, the information possible in remote locations. And we also see some refugees in very congested areas, very difficult to find the health support required. And then on the vaccine, of course, this becomes an additional challenge. Now, we have seen some progress with regard to vaccine distribution just in the last 10 days to about 19 countries, but we want to be able to include refugees and displaced people within that distribution. And of course, women and children being at the top of that list. I want to just end, Dr. Padrón, in terms of answering your question with a positive. Positively, we see that many countries now are including refugees and refugee women in their own response to the pandemic. We see women leading the charge. We see them taking action in places like Zatri in Jordan, which is the second largest refugee camp in the world, where they have basically organized on massive soap manufacturing and distribution. We see them using technology and innovation in order to get information out and to keep their communities safe. We know that it is possible to use this time during the pandemic really to reimagine the future, but we're going to need everyone here to be able to do that. Thank you.
If I could have a follow-up question, because my understanding is that this function of the United Nations is pretty large. So the question specifically is, how large is it?
It is large. So if there are 80 million displaced in the world today, including about 25 million refugees, we have a network of about 18,000 strong workforce across the globe in about 130 countries in 550 different locations. We have over 1,000 partners, and partners, humanitarian actors, local authorities, non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations. It is a large network of those that are trying to be able to support and lead an effort to be able to equip and empower.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to address the next question to Tara. And one thing that I have known for a long time is the long involvement of MasterCard in supporting refugees and especially women entrepreneurs. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and why has you chosen these areas of concentration?
Sure, happy to. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. It is a conversation that, as you said, we're very passionate about at MasterCard. I think we've been involved in this humanitarian development space now for about 10 years. And I think some of those first conversations were with Kelly. So indeed, a very old and dear friend. Our first program dated back 10 years ago, partnering with several different UN agencies and NGOs to figure out how we could use digital technology to deliver humanitarian aid to Syrian refugees in Jordan and Lebanon, over 2 million at the time. And I think the inspiration came from the following. What we saw was the ability for digital technology to serve as, we talked about, Kelly used an interesting phrase that I loved, a risk multiplier. I think we saw this as a solution multiplier, that how digital could actually be a force for good that helped leapfrog over the traditional gaps and barriers that not only marginalized individuals and communities and genders faced, but that they faced because of their environment, living in disconnected environments without connectivity, without access to mobile phones, et cetera. So we saw an opportunity for digital to play a key role. I think what happened over the course of the past 5 years in MasterCard, we've made a shift from where we started out, which was, okay, we have products and solutions off the shelf, prepaid cards and things that by leveraging a prepaid card to deliver humanitarian assistance to a refugee, we saw that we were able to deliver aid in a dignified manner that empowered the beneficiary to have choice, to consume fresh foods, to versus sort of the in-kind traditional distribution. And we saw that as a huge value. What happened was about 5 years ago, we said, how can we take this thinking and make it bigger and make it even more bolder? And I think that transition has been one about how do we bridge from humanitarian to development? When we think about refugees being in refugee status going on 5, 10, sometimes longer, 15 years in a given area, it's no longer, we can't hand on heart say it's a temporary situation. It really is a long-term situation. So our mental thinking shifted to say, how do we shift from point solutions to starting to creating infrastructure? How does that infrastructure or the solutions that we're delivering in market actually become something that can build capacity for women, for communities, so that they can start to address some of the challenges that Kelly mentioned, sending their children to school, getting their children vaccinated, getting paid, making payments, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did was we've been building a set of solutions called Community Pass. And what that is really trying to do is moving from solutions to platforms. What does that mean? It means we figured out that in order for us to actually achieve the scale of the numbers that Kelly mentioned, 80 million refugees, she said this year, and she said that number is going to be growing. It wasn't enough for MasterCard as one sole player to actually start to address, these needs. We needed to create a capability for multiple players to crowd in and serve. And so how did we do that? We created digital rails. These rails are digital identity, a multi-wallet, a capability, a card capability, a digital acceptance capability, a data capability, but done all in a way that is lower cost for the service providers. So enabling UNHCR to go out and market and provide their digital ID and identify their beneficiaries more efficiently, enabling a Save the Children who's trying to deliver humanitarian aid more efficiently. And by creating this platform, again, our intention is to enable more people to serve more beneficiaries in a scalable way that's cheaper, that leaves a legacy such that you can now start to do ecosystem building. You can do commerce building. We see one of the most important things in this whole thing is that we've built this in a way that really puts the beneficiary, we call them the consumer, the demand seeker, the demand driver, at the center. Because what we sort of said is, whether your status, your legal status is refugee or not, you are a mother. You are a mother who demands certain products, who has certain needs, who has certain jobs. And so what we tried to do was create, like I said, this digital infrastructure to enable her to do that. I guess I'll end there.
Well, thank you. It's very impressive what you guys are doing, and I hope it will continue for a long time, as long as there is need.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go next to Ambassador Maya Gazelle. Congratulations again. That's quite an accomplishment and well deserved. You make us proud. So as a refugee and also as a young woman, I think it's important for us to know. I think the audience would be interested to know what, with your own personal journey, would you tell us about your own personal journey and what International Women's Day means to you?
Thank you very much. I want to start with thanking Concord for having me in this panel. It's like a huge honor. And thank you for everybody for congratulating me on my new Goodwill ambassadorship. I'm truly honored and very excited to embrace this role of mine. As I've been introduced, I've been working with Unhcr since 2017, and I've worked on different campaigns with them. And I'm very excited to actually carry on using my voice and advocating for their message and raising awareness about all the campaigns that they do, to make sure that people know better about refugees, to get this humanitarian image of a refugee rather than just a label that we're actually humans, and to be able also to inspire other people that there is actually hope and some good happening in the world. As for my story, I feel I'm very honored that I'm gonna share it now, because I feel it's very important to give this kind of a real life image, like, to all the work and the stuff that UNHCR and different people have been saying about working with refugees. I myself, I was very lucky to not have been to not having to go through like camps or having a dangerous journey to cross. My dad was in the UK first, and me and my mother and my two younger brothers arrived to the UK on a plane. We actually got accepted to get a family reunion visa. It was like a scheme that only particular countries that like participated in this kind of scheme of bringing family over, and we actually made it to the UK on a plane. It was a safe and sound journey that many people actually get surprised when I actually tell them that, because normally they just expect some sort of dangerous journey or something adventurous that I've been through to order to come safely to the UK. But life before coming to the UK, before the conflict, was pretty normal in Syria. I'm 21 now, and which means like a conflict started about when I was 11 or 12. And it was pretty normal at the start because I'm from Damascus. We lived there all our lives. So Damascus was one of the the last cities to actually get affected by the war. So it was not until like a few years after when we actually like got hit by the effects of the war, like not being able to live a normal life, having death very close to our sight, you know, considering death as a thing that can happen every day, which we would, but it was different when we were children. It was different when it was because of like bombs or anything like that. Life necessities such as water, electricity, gas for heating, even food sometimes were not accessible, or either were very expensive to reach. And education, most importantly, was also sometimes that like some times it wouldn't be like as a safe option for us to have. My parents knew that education was our key to success in the future. They understood the importance of it, and they really like tried their best for us not to lose our education. I had to change schools several times because each school would either be got caught at checkpoints, be surrounded, or just would be in a dangerous area that my parents didn't feel safe to send me there anymore. But I was lucky to carry on like my education and not having to stop. When I arrived to the UK at the age of 16, I had got what was equivalent to GCSEs, to general secondary like qualifications from Syria, and I was very proud of them. I had like all A's, and they valued so much to me because I literally had to go on my life to get that education. And arriving, I really had big dreams. I knew, even though I couldn't speak English, but I was very determined to start a school, start fresh, blend in, have a normal life, and just look at it in a more enthusiastic way. Like I had to leave everything behind, but I was very excited to start over. But it wasn't until I was actually faced with different stereotypes of schools not enrolling me. I tried getting enrolled from like several schools, and I got rejected here in the UK. And that's because they didn't think I was good enough. They didn't think that I could sit in a classroom like anybody else and prove myself. I told them to test me. I told them to check my qualification and knowledge, and that I really wanted to study and pursue my dreams, but they weren't willing to do so. I understand that there are different ends of the scale of severe trauma that people can go through, but I feel having my education taken away from me as a child who appreciated education so much really did crush my soul and made me feel that I'd left everything behind for nothing, kind of thing. I understand the safety aspect, the stability, the new country and everything, but even when I was in Syria, I still had my education. And in a way, education was so important. It was a priority. It wasn't a thing that we could just lose. But after a while, I realized that I needed to work on myself. I needed to prove people that I'm actually worthy of a chance. And I managed to get myself a place in a college to study engineering and actually fight for a place. I got tested, and the teacher who believed in me, he was just like, yeah, you're actually you know what you're on about, and you do have the knowledge, so we're offering you a place in our college. And that was basically my starting point of that gave me hope back, that made me believe in myself again, and that made me feel that I can be someone in this new country and actually achieve and become a better version of myself. And that's when I was able to look further and understand that I can do whatever I want as long as I believe in myself. I set myself a dream. I was amazed by airplanes, and I was amazed by the traffic of planes by Heathrow Airport, and I was just like, I want to fly planes. I still got faced by so many negativity. People would tell me Maya, you're Syrian, you're a woman, you're a refugee, you're a Muslim. How is it that you think you would be allowed in an airport to fly planes? They'd be like, you're not even allowed to pass airports normally, let alone fly planes. And I feel these kind of discouragements at the time is what gave me the motivation that I have today, the motivation that I want to prove people wrong, the motivation that I can do whatever I want to do as long as I'm determined and as long as I believe in myself. And that's actually the message that I hold with me today. Every day, trying to inspire others, trying to show people that I can be as good as anybody else. I am very close to graduating from university, and with a master's in aviation engineering. And last year I was able to actually get my pilot's my private pilot's license. I did my test in 2020 and I actually passed. So now I can actually call myself a pilot. Obviously, there are so many more steps ahead for me to prove myself and make sure that I fulfill all my dreams. But I think that's the main point about my journey and what I try to show others and how I try and inspire and show that it's small steps that takes you to your big achievement, and it's all going to work out for the best.
I'm sure it will. Your determination is very, very impressive. So no wonder they made you ambassador. So great. So Vaishali, would you tell us about your work at Ikea in the area of social entrepreneurship, and especially what is Ikea doing to support women?
I would like to thank on the panel everyone for us considering Ikea to be in the same platform, and then listening to Maya, it's heartwarming. I mean, listening to your story. So in our space, I mean, Ikea, a small contribution in this regard, if I say so, is that it sits very well in our vision, which is about better everyday life for the many people. And we had set up 3 clear directions, which goes, and I would say trickles down everything what we do in the organization, across the organization, whatever task we do. And that is the 3 directions being affordable, accessible, and then contribute to positive impact to people, society, and planet. So whatever we do, these are the 3 strong pillars that it needs to deliver to. And with that said, we have set an ambition in reaching and interacting with 3 billion people in another 10 years. So with that people, society, and planet impact, we want to strengthen it by being circular, by health and well-being through our products, and then also fair and equal. So if I see our initiative, Social Entrepreneurs Partnership, it strengthens our contribution towards being fair and equal, where our scope is to focus on women in vulnerable communities and then also marginalized groups. And this, we know that it differs from countries to countries and regions to regions. From a sustainability perspective, that's where we deliver, but it's equally important, and that's the reason I'm sitting in the business, is that how with business, we can have wider impact, go deeper in terms of the communities which need us, and then trade as a medium to be sustainable. Because we have been doing aid and we continue doing so through our other sort of part of organization, which probably you know about, Ikea Foundation, who has been there for decades. And then for us who have been, you know, I would say we are pretty nascent in, you know, it's only 8 years since we started this, but we have done a journey. So sitting in the business through our products and services, we want to engage with this group of people. And it is not about any small enterprises that we interact. We partner with enterprises where the social issues, the groups which I just mentioned, sit in the core of the business. So where that aspects of integration is equally important as being successful for these enterprises. And there are many. And then for that, we, of course, we couldn't do it our own. We need to collaborate. And we collaborated with Shrubs Foundation. We collaborated with ILO, UNHCR in the regions where we were, sort of to come up with partnerships which can strengthen it. And we help us in creating, you know, sustainable livelihood opportunities through economic empowerment of this group. So right now we are globally, we have nine global partnerships, which focuses on home furnishing products and food range, which is available both in our stores and in also online. And in fact, the journey, first 3 years were the pilot years for us to get to know how to work and what is best for them, because it is a step-by-step to integrate these enterprises into the core of the business. And then for them to get to know us. And I think one of the biggest learning there in that journey was, how do we simplify ourselves when we want to reach out to these organizations, both in terms of processes, but also being flexible. And that was an assignment given to me also and my team to look into. So we focused on women in India, in the regions where there are challenges. We focus on tribal inclusion in northern part of Thailand, small farm holders with women and youth focus in Africa, which are supplying coffee to us. And then we have women in Jordan, focusing on refugees and host communities together, making products for us. So you can see the scope in terms of what we cover. And in all these enterprises, they are different in different way in terms of challenges, but what binds it together, if I put it like that, I mean, more than 85% of it, you know, whom we work with are women. And then more so to say, good number of them are also led by women. So I mean, and with financial empowerment, economic empowerment, through that, we see that we strengthen looking into the other SDGs probably. So that's our sort of an entry point through this initiative, you know, where we have consciously set it into the business. And we have set ambitions for us. So we want to go beyond the countries, what I just mentioned too. We are this year starting in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, Ethiopia. And already today, we impact directly close to around 30,000 jobs and 150,000 family impact. And we have set an ambition that within 4 years, we want to really triple it by reaching close to around 95,000, you know, direct jobs creation and 500,000 family impact. So that's where it is. And I would say that we are still on the journey, learning, but we see, you know, stories like Maya, you know, coming up, you know, in our partnership last 8 years with sort of, you know, being role model in the communities where they work with. And our take and my team's work is more in terms of financial inclusion.
Well, I know it's a long journey, but I can tell you that you are ahead of the game. And You know, MasterCard and Ikea are two global businesses. And I think we're very fortunate to have you here because what you've done is very impressive. And I think a lot of other businesses can learn from your experiences as well as your accomplishments. But I'd like to know more specifically, what have you done to help build resilience as well as helping women get the skills that are necessary to be able to innovate? And specifically, any success stories, any lessons learned, any best practices that you can share with us. And I'm gonna address that to both of you. So whoever wants to start first, it's fine. Tara?
Okay.
Go ahead, Vaishali.
Okay, thank you, Tara. So what I would say is that one of the first fallouts of COVID-19 was impact on supply chain. Having said that, I mean, it also pushed us in terms of, acting fast, being flexible, because it was the need of the hour. And the resilience part of it, if I say so, sitting in the business, I see that it empowers me and my team together with our partners to come up with the solutions collectively. Because we were sort of being, the way to resilience and then to, I would say more to create employability, that has been the core of the initiative. And that's the reason it is sitting in the business, because through that, we can use the entire machinery and the ecosystem of the Ikea to sort of mobilize and to upskill, even before COVID, the partnerships, and in this case, the women. So I have excellent stories in terms of during the last 8 years. But nevertheless, I mean, what I would say that what opened the door with this being sitting in the business, unlike a CSR initiative or the initiatives which are one-time buy, this was a partnership which was very clear that it's a long journey. We are all in together from the upper management, and it is you need to be patient. So this was, I would say that these were the fundamentals which were ingrained in from all the learnings which we have done in the past by initiatives which have sort of been done, or sort of ventured out into the space of either, which were far off from the business. This was set into the business to get the right prerequisite, if I put it like that, to sort of, to move towards resilience. And then move towards, finally, I would say from independence, even in fact. So I mean, that's what, with our partnerships, we sort of follow up and measure that during the course of the journey with Ikea, they get access to our, supply chain. So they source key raw materials through our network. And we want them to focus on the value additions, what they're good at. Because if we don't do that, they will not be competitive. And when we say that every day, better everyday life for the many people in Ikea to reach the customer base, these are some of the prerequisites. We can't let them sort of venture out on their own and want to fix it. When we say partnership, we have to sort of co-create and collaborate. So right from IT tools to supply chain access to logistic build up, I mean, our teams work together with them. And then in the journey, I would say that, yes, there is a lot of knowledge share and know-how, but there is another way around also learning for our designers and our teams, how to simplify ourselves. How do we make craft, which is, sort of in a Scandinavian identity? How then it becomes beyond a tourist sort of, attraction into a sustainable way of being part of your home and design and co-create together. So I would say that's extremely important. And that's, I would say, the fundamentals, how I sort of can say from a resilience perspective. And then, and during COVID, of course, it sort of pushed I would say, the mechanism much faster for the fact that we were part of call to action, which many of the, the institutions and the private partnership came together and to look into during the lockdown time. We ensured that the orders are in place. They are not canceled for these enterprises because that was important. We had to really work fast from moving from a center-based to home-based. And that was very much needed, especially in also areas like Jordan and India, where they were locked down. And through that, how we can sort of get access for them for digital tools. We had to collaborate beyond the IKEA ecosystem to get access to simple ERP systems for them to sort of work with. And in that journey also upskill both the organization and young artisans who had interest in going into that space. So, I mean, I have many examples, and one such example is, of course, I mean, I have examples where women, in our artisanal group over there, where the husband moved out from the city because the women had, she had started earning well, and he was a master tailor in Mumbai with all the challenges of a big city, moved in back to the space. And now he's working as a, senior tailor in our enterprise, and then making others learn. I have stories like Raja, who is in Yatri camp, who travels 3 hours every day back and forth to the center to work because 2 sisters are feeding in 8 in the family in the camp. And for her to sort of go out to learn skills, she's a seamstress now and has an ambition to learn embroidery as a craft, So I have excellent, stories which are during this course of journey. You see how financial inclusion gives them not only to invest in themselves, in their kids and the family to save, but the confidence, the self-confidence, and I would say a decision-making power, which it gives to them, both in the family and, in the community.
Yeah, so, I hope these success stories are being shared with other refugee communities as an incentive and motivation. It's wonderful. Yeah. So what about you, Tara?
I'll give maybe just one example that sort of illustrates maybe a number of other examples I could give. I think what I was struck by was Kelly's comment on how 70% of all the healthcare workers are women. And, if you look at smallholder farmers in many geographies, it's north of 50, 60%. When you look at who are the primary caregivers, it's women. So what we found in our work is that by definition, the majority of our work around figuring out how to use digital tools to enable service delivery actually is servicing women, right? What we also saw during COVID, which was very interesting, is how the digital divide exacerbated the haves and the have-nots. So you already have communities that are marginalized. If on top of that, as is the case with women, who are 40% less likely to be digitally included, they suffered even greater hardship. Mm-hmm. Where people had digital access, and I think you and I and those of us who live in sort of more developed contexts, right? We know that our kids would get on Skype. I think, Eduardo, you were saying at the beginning of this call, you were saying, gosh, 5 years ago, we couldn't have had this meeting on Skype, right? If you're living in a developed context with connectivity, with Skype, with iPads, then, for a lot of us, I'm ashamed to say our life continued on as normal. But when you are living in a marginalized community where you don't have access to the technology or the connectivity or remote payments or commerce, suddenly your livelihood is cut off, right? The ability to get paid is cut off because you have to show up in person if you're going to get paid, right? What we found in some of our communities through, for example, across India, was those smallholder farmers who are connected to marketplaces that we had helped create had their trade, so their sale of mangoes and turmeric continued on. They were able to sell like 500 metric tons of turmeric through COVID, which they wouldn't have been able to do had they not been connected to these marketplaces, right? What's really interesting, as I heard sort of Maya talking about education, and Kelly talking about healthcare and service delivery, the example I'll give you is of one of the farmers I personally had the opportunity to meet when I was in rural Uganda. And she was similarly connected to what we call the MasterCard Farmer Network, which is it's a marketplace for smallholder farmers. So it enables them to take their produce and post it, and so that they can get access to large buyers. So whereas when they're not digital, right, they are, what do you want to call it? They're limited by whoever comes to the farm gate. And if whoever comes to the farm gate offers you a penny, $1, or $10, that's what you have to take. But suddenly digital gives them the ability to access global markets, regional markets. And now she can command a price that is commensurate to what is being traded in the market. And this farmer, she was telling us, and I was actually seeking feedback. I said, give me feedback on this product and tell me how I can do, what I can do to make this better. She was so thrilled that now she was able to receive her payments digitally. Why was she excited? Well, not only did she get the money that she could then feed her family with, what she found is she could hide it from her husband. She can take money and hide it to go do things, because we know that when you put $1 in the hand of a woman, she puts it towards feeding the family, educating her children, et cetera, right? And giving them medical care and vaccinations. And so she said this gave her the power, now that she was receiving her payments on a digital card, to actually control how those funds were paid. And what was really interesting, I said, okay, well, what could make this product better? Tell me what could make this even better? Because remember, I said, we're trying to move from products to platforms, right? She said, well, what would be really great is that instead of getting the money on this card and having to cash it out, if I could then automatically make my school payment. Because I also heard, I think it was I can't remember who was saying it, talking about traveling hours and hours to go to school, hours and hours to go to the farm, hours and hours. What this enabled her to do was make a tuition payment on behalf of her daughter, who was in school remotely. Instead of taking a day off from the farm and losing those days' wages, she could now make a digital payment to make her school fees get paid. The other thing that the same one card, one capability enabled was when the Gavi Alliance comes into her country and does vaccine distribution, or when the government is doing now, let's say, COVID vaccine distribution. It enabled her local healthcare clinic, right, to deliver those vaccines digitally and start to track, give her a digital record of her vaccine. So now she knows, the government knows, the healthcare worker knows that Rachel, my smallholder farmer, had received her first dose and that she was eligible for her second dose. It enabled us to send her reminders to make sure that she came in, because we know that one of the key elements to disease eradication is actually adherence to the vaccine regimen. We're great at getting the first dose out to people sometimes, but how do we get the second and the third out so that we can actually lead to the disease eradication or the effective health outcomes that we're trying to get to, right? And so what we found is that now that we were building this platform, we were able to layer on the multiple solutions, all in a way that it put her in control of her data, that did it in a contactless way. So using biometrics and things like that, where, in the olden days, right, how do we go? We come in, we have to pick up this pen and we're signing and we're touching things. And in a COVID world, no one wants to be touching anything. With biometrics, you can walk in, present your face, or just show your hand, right? And that captures, authenticates who you are, and makes you eligible for services from vaccines to educational school payments to smallholder farmer pay, or to government subsidies. So that's an example of sort of some of the things that we're working on, doing it across multiple markets, obviously, India, Uganda, Kenya, all across East Africa.
It's fascinating. So time is running out, but I'd like to get to Kelly. And I'd like to know, from your humanitarian and development perspective, how have women refugees used their, I would call it, resilience and innovation to fight the pandemic? And what has been the role, in your opinion, of the private sector in all of this?
Thank you, Dr. Padrón. So you've just heard two dynamic business leaders talk exactly about the kind of approach we're taking with regard to refugee women, the use of technology, innovation, Vaishali talked about financial inclusion. Tara talked about digital inclusion. Both are essential. And really, in terms of innovation and technology, we're using it in multiple ways. So, for example, Tara talked about mobile wallets. And this is something that is absolutely essential, particularly during the pandemic and particularly for refugee women with regard to cash assistance. We were able to distribute $700 million in 2020 to 8.1 million refugee and displaced persons in terms of that kind of cash support. That pays the rent, that puts food into mouths, that keeps small businesses going when they're in such peril, particularly now. There are ways to use technologies, and the inclusion piece becomes very important when we start talking about counseling people over the phone with regard to psychosocial or people that have been subject to gender-based violence, as opposed to looking at in-person contact. The use of WhatsApp messaging in terms of information related to the pandemic or what opportunities may be available for those small business growths. It really, what you're hearing in this discussion is that we don't view refugee women as aid beneficiaries, as passive recipients. They are part of the solution. They are part of the decisions in terms of, they are making the decisions in terms of how they participate and how they care for themselves and how they care for their families. There are numerous examples of where we've seen this kind of innovation, from the small, the breaks in the supply chain in places like India that was described, or in Cox's Bazar, where you had Rohingya refugees basically mass producing masks pretty much on a dime and overnight, because they realized how important it was. These were refugee women that were leading this effort. And so they were really taking decisions and able to find solutions, and also making a bit of money at the same time to be able to support themselves. The private sector is critical to this. And Ikea, of course, and the business partner Inklo are essential, as well as MasterCard. And we have other partners as well to do things like try to get that cash to refugees in their host communities, like finding employment for refugees. And this, this is a win really for everyone. It's a win for the refugee, it's a win for the business, it's a win for the community and the country in which they find themselves. That's money going into the economy, and those are assets and skills that are being put to good use. Support to tertiary education. I know you yourself are an educator and very committed and passionate about that. And we just heard Maya talk about how important her tertiary education was. It's the connected learning programs, particularly in a pandemic, to reach women and girls in terms of making sure they can expand and extend their education, particularly in a pandemic. We have obviously important partnerships with Vodafone and Microsoft in that regard in terms of connected learning. Unilever came to the rescue when it came to soap and hygiene materials that we needed very quickly, and supported our operations in 40 different countries with regard to trying to keep people safe. These are important signals of why the private sector matters, and important signals about why we need to be working together in terms of both getting through the pandemic, but also making it possible for people not to be the recipients of aid, but actually be able to provide for themselves.
Thank you. We're gonna go to the audience very fast, but before we do that, I'd like to ask Ambassador Maya Gazelle a question. And because you are such a great example of resilience, I'm sure the audience would like to know what gives you hope and what inspires you.
I'm just gonna be quick on that because, obviously I'm wary of the time. But what inspires me is the difference that I want to make. It's the difference that I want to see. What gives me hope and also inspires me at the same time is the support that I get from my local community, the support that I get from people such as Unhcr and different organizations, and my friends and family. That always keeps me going. And I feel that one message it's important to say, especially on International Women's Day, is that when one woman succeeds, we all succeed, and a real change becomes possible. You just gotta believe in yourself and understand that it's small steps that creates this big difference and huge change. And by investing in refugees' education, you're actually investing in your in your own community, you're investing in potential hopes and dreams and futures and human beings that are willing to give back and thankful for a second chance. And I feel that this is a potential that is very valuable for refugees and for their host community at the same time.
Thank you so much. So I have some questions here from the audience. So the first one is to Kelly, and it goes like this. It says, inherently, data gaps have always masked the true scale of gender-based violence. I assume that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these data discrepancies even more. What is Unhcr doing to help address these data gaps? Are there any innovative policies? What would you say the role of the private sector should be addressing these data gaps? As for you, Kelly.
Great question, and a very one that would require a long answer to be complete. But in short, here's another opportunity. We talked about digital inclusion. We talked about partnership with the private sector. We have partnerships with obviously some of those institutions that can help take the raw data that we have based on the conversations and the inputs we're receiving from refugee women and be able to analyze that against broader trends, both in that country, but also globally, to allow us to be able to identify some ways that we can reach people better, that we can program more effectively and efficiently. And that clearly the person who asked the question has a lot of background in this area, because there have been big gaps, but there are also opportunities. And this is where we've seen the partnership, particularly during the pandemic, become all the more important, and for us to be able to be better providers of aid.
Thank you. So the next question is for the ambassador. And it goes like this. How do you think your generation is suited to address the challenges that women will face tomorrow? And in your opinion, what are these major challenges?
Wow, that's a hard question to answer that. I feel like the big challenges is actually having a supportive community for my generation. I feel my generation knows and understands the importance of education, but in many places, this option of having the stability of having education, of having the security of a country that they understand that they can live and dream and conquer their life in, is sometimes not present. I feel like it's very important also for the private sector to understand how much power they hold in terms of raising the new generation of refugees, in supplying internships and helping organizations such as Unhcr as well to create those better environments that refugees' children can flourish and can fulfill their dreams. That is sometimes always a challenge. I feel everybody can hop in on the trend and make a difference. I feel everybody has the power of creating this kind of change, as little as a kind word, a smile, a small donation, signing up to the newsletter of Unhcr to check their campaigns. As little as those kind of actions, it can really make a huge difference. I just wanted someone to believe in me, and and I managed to get this far. So let alone what your words would make, or what your support would make to many vulnerable refugees, that would make them believe in themselves and realize that they can achieve and become a great asset in their new community.
Wonderful. Well, we have run out of time, unfortunately. We could spend here a couple more hours hearing about the things that you are doing, but I think we got a very good doses of the great contributions that you all make. Thank you for making this world a better place for all of us. Thank you for the audience who have participated. And thank you to Concordia and to the Unhcr for organizing this wonderful program. And again, good luck to all of you, and let's hope we see each other soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.